All right, hi, welcome in to the breakdown on the Dhammapada, and we're going to be taking a look at this amazing special book and extracting some of the wisdom that Buddha was trying to leave with the world. So to begin, we're just going to break down the original story and kind of see what we can already derive from that. So if you're not familiar, the Dhammapada is essentially a collection of teachings from the Buddha. And who is the Buddha though? So before we begin, we really got to kind of understand his journey. And if you're not familiar with it, it would really help to have a context. So Buddha, as you might have heard, most people have at least heard of that concept. Buddha meaning the enlightened one or the awakened one, was actually a name or a title given to Siddhartha Gautama later in his life. So after he had gone through so many trials and meditation-like experiences, renouncing the world to get to the Buddha. So who is Siddhartha then? Siddhartha was born as a prince, and he was an heir to the throne. And when he was born, there was a prophecy about his life. And this prophecy said, this child, your child king, will become either a great conqueror or he will become an ascetic. He will become, a renunciant of the world. So in the Indian culture, there is very clear systems or castes, or you could think of it as like jobs or duties. And in these castes or in these social structures, you usually are going to have to stick to whatever you were born into. So, well, not usually, you're going to. So he's born into royalty, right? And now not only royalty, but a warrior royalty, okay? So his father is a warrior, and so he obviously wants him to become a warrior and a conqueror. But what this sage kind of reveals is that he'll become a great conqueror, yes, but over emotions and over the mind. And the greatest conqueror, he'll conquer and save the world in a sense. And so his father, though, is still very torn about this. He does not want him to become an ascetic. And an ascetic was the group or class in society that left the world and sought greater spiritual truths. And so these are the people that walked around in robes usually and a begging bowl and had nothing. They usually had long hair, beard, dreadlocks, they didn't take care of themselves. So they just essentially went off into the Himalayas or into nature, and they just let the divine guide them every day. And that was that class. Now you have the warrior class, you have the working laborer class, like merchants and all of your economy essentially. And then you have the untouchables or your this is like your rejects of society, or just all of your deformed or handicapped or addicted or sick, or all of these types of things. So and extremely poor, so that would be like your poverty and your homeless. Okay, so you have this social structure. This will be important later on, and especially for the beginning now, understanding why his father did not want him to go off into the forest, because he's like, well, then how am I going to have an heir to the throne? So he's really alarmed by this. So because he's so alarmed by it, he makes sure that Siddhartha never comes in contact with anything that's going to drive him towards that. Now, what is an ascetic usually trying to figure out? An ascetic is reaching spiritual truths to transcend suffering. So transcending pain and misery in the world by understanding something greater about life. And because of that, the king, his father, therefore prevents any harm or pain or misery or suffering or sickness or death around Siddhartha. He wants him to never see those things so that he doesn't ever get curious about them. This is his thinking. And it's actually ironic, because this counter action or this obsession with not letting him see it is we'll see actually created a more curiosity. It's kind of like, don't push the red button, and that tends to make children and just people in general a little more curious, because we're like, well, why not? Okay, so Siddhartha grows up in very privileged. He never sees sickness, he never sees death. He's like completely pampered, right? He has this dream life. He's completely taken care of and intelligent and super educated because he's educated by the Brahmin. And the Brahmin, missed this as another one of the class. This is like your professors. This is your spiritual teachers. This is your wise of society. So the Brahmin are the teachers, and specifically of the ancient traditions. Now, he's being taught by them, but the king has told him to leave some things out, right? So he still excels nevertheless, and tends to, right off the bat, he tended to just excel in everything he did. So he was a very gifted soul regardless, let alone, of course, we know his spiritual destiny. So he's being raised in this privileged lifestyle, and we'll kind of fast forward to keeps demonstrating his excellence, right? His father obviously is very proud. He's so excited. He's going to take the throne. And Siddhartha for a while too is, he's planning on doing that. But eventually later on in his life, we could guess probably roughly around in his 20s, he sees suffering for the first time. And he really is getting curious about wanting to see the world. And so, because he's never been able to leave his kingdom, his father has kept him there so that he would never see these things. Or if he ever interacted with people, the king kind of, in a sense, screened them first and like made sure that they were okay to see him. Okay, so he finally gets curious. He really wants to leave, and his father, despite wanting to, he knows that I can't keep him here. And Siddhartha uses really good logic as to why he needs to see it. Like, for example, how am I to rule a kingdom that I've never seen? He says things like this that the king can't really deny, so it causes an issue. So the king has to eventually allow it, because otherwise Siddhartha's like, I don't understand, why won't you let me leave? So he gets to leave, and of course the king does what he can by making sure the streets are perfect, they're gorgeous, all the sick and homeless are away. He even apparently built a city to get them out and go put them away somewhere else. What a trip, right? So anytime they were sick or dying, they were taken away to this other village where they were out of his sight. Okay, so he sees someone that's suffering and he gets super curious. What is that, right? His first time seeing a crippled person, or his first time seeing someone extremely sick or dying. And he encounters all of these things, and he has his friend with him, and he goes with him everywhere. So he keeps asking him, hey, what is that? What is going on? And he says, well, that is sickness, my lord. That is death. That is, and so forth, so forth. So he starts seeing suffering, and obviously he's really curious, and he doesn't understand it. Now, ironically, this is the irony, ironically he's so fascinated and curious by it because he's never known of it. So imagine if you never saw suffering and then suddenly you did, you would be baffled. And this actually created a way bigger curiosity, I would imagine, because he's like, what in the world is that? Because imagine going your first at least 20 years of life never seeing a blemish or an old person or crippled or handicapped or anything, right? Everything is just perfect. Imagine how what? It would not seem natural to you, and it didn't. So he was completely taken back by this. Now, another thing too is as a role of a warrior, Siddhartha never really wanted to harm people or animals. He, from the beginning, found that really strange. And another big thing, besides seeing the suffering, is he also was involved in some battles where he found that completely deranged. And his solution was always to try and find a diplomatic way out of it. He hated an appalled war, and so he would come up with, say, things like, let's have your best archer and our best archer compete, and whoever wins, wins the war. And that way, no one has to die. This is the kind of thinking that he would come up with in order to stop violence. So he sees, everything, every aspect of suffering really we as humans could see. He sees war, he sees death, old age, sickness, pain, he sees loss, he sees separation, he sees people fighting and arguing, he sees families torn apart, children abandoned, right? He He travels his kingdom and he sees all of these things. Now, eventually this builds up to just a breaking point. Now, because he's so intelligent, he's been raised to think for himself and think super critically, he therefore, that gets used against him. He therefore wants to know why and how to stop it, right? So he wants to figure out how to transcend it or help everyone. How can we be human and be in suffering? This can't be the only way. So he becomes super fascinated by it. Nothing else is of interest anymore. And this obviously was to the king's dismay. All right, so fast forwarding again, he does get married, he has a child, and right around this time is when he starts to realize, though, I have to leave, because he's noticing that he's feeling the extreme highs of life, and immediately he's starting to be like, whoa, that means I'm exposed to the loss and suffering I keep seeing. So now that he has a wife, he's like, whoa, but she could die, or she could get sick, she could leave, or I could leave, or whatever. The point is, I would feel separation from her. Then he has a child, and the same thing starts again. He's so joyous, but then he's like, oh my gosh, my son's gonna die. My son's gonna suffer. And so, there's kind of interesting views of him leaving his family to pursue enlightenment. And, an interesting positive view, and this is what his wife, Yoshandara, took, was to see it as he did it for his family. This is at least what he was supposed to have, portrayed and said, like, I have to do this. It is for you and it's for all of humanity. And it was, he saw the people he loved and he knew they were going to suffer. And so he wanted to find a solution to that. So he leaves his wife and child, and surprisingly, his wife is like pure loyalty and devotion and always stays loyal to him. And he leaves and goes off into the forest, so to become an ascetic, just like the prophecy said. And his father fought endlessly to keep it from him, and ironically, in my opinion, his obsession with him not finding it is actually why he found it. Because if he would have been exposed to normal amounts of human interaction where there were suffering and old age and death, and he saw these things, he probably wouldn't have been as taken back by it, because it would have been something he might have maybe accepted earlier on in his life. Who knows? At the end of the day, he wanted to fix it. So he leaves because the only way to find the solution was to become an ascetic. His teacher, his Brahmin teachers, had reached a point where he couldn't really get anything more from them. And besides, they taught very ancient teachings. So they were teaching more religious style of teaching. And Buddha actually had kind of an issue with religion from what we can read about his interactions. Because he didn't see why it was grounds for justifying things. Like strange behavior, like say rituals. He was like, this doesn't make any sense. Why does God want me to burn this sage and cedar and offer this or that, or like kill a bull? Like the rituals of killing animals he found completely appalling, and they made no sense to him. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. Why would God want me to do this? So he had kind of reached his point with them. He kind of started to transcend his teachers. So he leaves. The ascetics are waiting, and he goes about finding, random sages along the way. Overall, though, none of them are able to satisfy his curiosity. So his friend reluctantly leaves him because he tells him, you have to leave me. He gives him all his robes, all his garments, his ornaments, his, all of his royalty, essentially. Gives it to him, and he says, you have to go back, tell them I'm going, and don't come find me. And I'm going to transcend suffering. I'm going to save the world in a sense, but he probably didn't think of it that way. But I'm going to help everyone. So he finds ascetics along the way, and they teach him, meditation. They teach him the basics, but overall he's like, yes, but how to transcend suffering? Yes, more. And he keeps kind of transcending his teacher. because they eventually are like, I have not discovered that yet. If you find someone who does, let me know. I will gladly be their disciple. And he continues. And he figures out that this journey is going to be his own. This is going to be done alone, and he cannot just necessarily rely on a teacher like he has in the past. And this begins his 6-year quest into deep meditation and pursuing various paths that ascetics have tried in India. So one of the ways is rejecting the body, and to reject the body because it's not who you are. And so, meditating all day, not feeding it, not giving it water, kind of letting it wither and just renouncing it. Now, he does this and nearly dies because he's so extreme, like he's so disciplined. He's just like, I'm not gonna eat. Now, he eventually almost dies, and then it dawns on him, how can this be the truth if I die to get it? It doesn't make sense yet again. And so eventually it's said that a lady, finds him by the river and feeds him. And the people who were following him at this point, the few sages or the few ascetics who had started to follow him, actually abandoned him because they were like, what are you doing? You're giving up your oath, you're abandoning the pact, And so they actually leave him, and they're like, yeah, this isn't the truth. You're a false teacher now. You're a false guru. And he just says, well, okay, like, I'm sorry you feel that way. And he tries to explain it to them. This can't be the truth because it's so extreme that you're gonna die. That can't be it. And this is kind of the beginning of the middle way that he starts to, postulate and start to figure out, because these extreme paths weren't getting him anywhere. So he continues on trying other meditations, trying other styles, and he's starting to develop his own middle way. He's starting to realize that that it is desire that is causing him to suffer and causing humans to suffer. He starts to realize that it is these external attractions that we have that pull us out of the true peace within us, and we become wrapped up in the world, and then loss is able to happen because we're attached and we're really enmeshed into the world. So after this long period, he finally has a breakthrough by facing his desires and conquering his desires and emotions, in a sense. So he meditates to the point of facing all of these inner issues that all of us carry, all these inner attachments, and he faces what is called Mara, which is that you can think of it as like the devil concept, but it's that ego self that is based in fear. It is the root of our emotions, and it is the root and cause of desires, right? So it's said like he faces desire, lust, attachment, greed, envy, jealousy. Like these are all products of passion, right? Of unhinged desire, and he defeats it. He transcends it in that he lets it go and is not assuaged by it, and he's not tempted by it. So because he's not tempted by it, he is therefore free from it because it now has no power over him. All right, so the Buddha is born, and he is, dawned the awakened one by the first few people who come and find him, and they notice how much he's changed. So while he was meditating, there were some people who were kindly kind of taking care of him, provided like a little place for him to sit, like some straw, and would feed him every day, just like his one meal that he would have. And they were the ones who obviously noticed it first when they saw him come out of it. And then from then on, we have the Buddha. We have this changed being, Siddhartha is gone, in a sense. Siddhartha is no longer, because this new awakened being is not a personality with attachments and desires anymore. This is a being who is an embodiment of universal consciousness. So there isn't a limiting personality behind it. That's why we would say like the personality Siddhartha is gone, is no longer there, and now he is Buddha. All right, so the book begins by going into thoughts and the mind. Buddha spent a lot of time teaching how the root of all suffering is our thinking, is our mental attachments and desires. So right away, the Dhammapada starts outlining how what we think we become. So the Buddha says this a lot in the first chapter. He's constantly repeating how whatever your thoughts are, that is what your experience will unfold to be. In that it's always connected. In a sense, our thoughts create our reality. It's not that they physically create our reality, but they create our experience of that reality. So he goes on to say how joyful thoughts will bring joyful consequences, and hateful and evil thoughts will bring hurtful and evil consequences. So he's showing how everything is connected. So as we think, we become. In that, where our thoughts continually keep going to, we will keep gravitating towards. So we think things of love, or we think things of hate or desire or lust or greed or something of those anything of those natures, and that is where we are drawn to. It's what we perceive, it's what we choose to see in the world. If we have a perspective that we're holding, we have a thought that we're holding, we will then perceive our world as a reflection of that, or in relationship to it. So if I am happy or upset or any other emotion, it's all attached to my thinking, the Buddha says. So he really just goes deep into this right away. And a funny thing too is, like, in modern science now with quantum physics, we're finding out that as you think, you really do become. In that, even going is crazy and quantum enough that, you know, atoms don't even exist until we perceive them, and then they appear into existence according to having an observer. Like, what? So this is, you know, we could almost go that far into, that's what Buddha was getting at, in that he's saying what you think literally is your reality. You are that. So he spends a lot of time obviously wanting to talk about this then, because he pointing out that all suffering comes from this. It comes from our thinking, it comes from our beliefs and patterns of thought. And so therefore it's really important to be disciplined. He talks a lot about having a disciplined mind and using all these metaphors and parables of, you know, the monk needs to be disciplined, otherwise it will, thoughts will just seep in like water through a bucket with holes, kind of thing. Like, it's just that if we don't take control over our mind and become aware that this is happening, then we will never truly be free of suffering. So while we are going about our day, you know, our thoughts are going to be unfolding and, you know, coming in, coming out. And it's not that we need to necessarily control the mind, because as you know, if you've studied any type of meditation or tried to control your mind, it's not possible, in that it actually becomes more unwily. You know what I mean? It becomes more unruly, is what I would say, and wily. It becomes really uncontrollable, in a sense. We kind of realize how futile that is. So it's not about control in a sense of like stop thinking, because when we try to do that, we notice it doesn't work. So what is Buddha getting at here? He's trying to point out that we need to step back and become an observer of the thoughts and realize that we are separate from them. And as we realize that we are separate from them, they don't have the ability to control and run us anymore. Because when you've separated yourself from the thoughts, they now are not in running you, an autopilot. You have now separated yourself from thoughts, and you now have true choice. This is where free will really comes in, is because now you're not on autopilot. Now you're not just following a subconscious program, that your thinking is just driving you, from one thing to the next, one thing to the next. And so if you are letting your thoughts rule you, you're going to always suffer, Buddha says, and you're always going to have desires and unmet desires and frustrations, and you're going to have highs from desires being met, you're going to have lows from desires not being met. And this is the human plight. And so, first thing of the book, part 1, we have many teachings from Buddha pointing out the importance of our mind and how our very fundamental reality is colored and even from a quantum physics standpoint, it's almost derived from our point of observation. Life has everything available within it, shall we say, but our thoughts kind of filter what we want to see. It's as if we all put on sunshades, and we are filtering out certain wavelengths that we don't want to see, or that we don't jive with, or we don't agree with. So it's all there. There's misery and bliss all and everything in between, all in this moment. It's all right now. And it's just a matter of us all tuning in to different frequencies and seeing what we want to see. So what we think, we become super important, because what this provides is the framework that Buddha is going to just continue to talk about throughout the book. It all is going to be coming back to this concept. That's why it's maybe placed first in the book. Whether or not this was like a process of his teaching, we don't know, but this is just how the compilation is compiled. So paying attention to the mind and becoming aware of it, this is the first process of enlightenment. This is the first process of transcending, because you now realize that you are not the thoughts. You are that which is watching it. So if you are listening or watching or observing thoughts, then you cannot be them. Right? If you were thoughts, if you were your mind, then you would have no awareness of it. You would just be it, right? So there would be nothing to, experience the thoughtness. There would just, there would be no observation, right? So we notice as we sit with our mind, we notice that there is something beyond and behind the thoughts. There is the background of silence that makes them perceivable. Just like when there is sound, sound is only heard because of the background of silence. Without silence, you cannot have sound, right? So these are connected. When you have light, you have darkness. These two play off of each other. Okay, it's the same concept when you start paying attention to your mind. There is a void of consciousness, shall we say, like a projector and a movie screen. There is the screen that is just impartial and just accepts whatever is projected onto it. No judgment, just observing, just plain, unbiased, and just perfect as is. The projector, in a sense, is reality coming upon us. And any film that we put into it is our perception. It's our goggles. It's the filters that we put on and we choose to see. So the projector, that infinite reality, is all available. And how we choose to perceive our world dictates everything. All right, so fundamentals here of suffering then are you have to pay attention to the thoughts, because without paying attention to our mind, we can never be free. And this is the basis of Buddha's teaching, is go into the thoughts, observe them, watch them, notice that we are separate from them, and therein we find our first bit of real power. And this is the framework that we're going to be building off for the rest of the Dhammapada.